I have fear. Fear is a natural response. One of my first surfs at Sunset Beach, I just shit myself on a wipeout. Literally.
Take control over it and create and generate a pattern of breath that's conducive to bringing in a parasympathetic state. We literally take control of our mind-body system in that moment. The body's screaming at you and telling you you're going to die, but actually your oxygen levels will be still really quite high for quite a period. You're around about 50% to 2/3 of the way through your oxygen at that point. You've got a long time.
Do you struggle with your paddle power? Well, I can go months without surfing and roll up to pumping waves and surf 3-hour sessions multiple times a day after day after day by using the Basis Paddle Trainer. It was a total game changer for me, and it can be for you too. These things actually work, unlike elastic resistance bands. You can train your paddling anytime, anywhere, so you can catch more waves and have more fun. Just 10 to 20 minutes a couple times a week, and you're gonna be in insane paddle shape. Right? So remember, the key progression is more waves, and the key to more waves is more paddle power. Check it out at surfbasis.com. You're going to be stoked.
All right. Welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. Super stoked because we got Tom Carroll, 2-time world champ, 3-time pipe master, surfed the Eddie, riffs and small waves too. And we got Marcus Hamil. He's a sattva meditation teacher, breathwork expert, surfer. And together they have a really cool project called Breathwork for Surfers. And it's perfect. I was just telling them about this, but I was surfing and somebody came up to me and was like, man, I really struggle being in my head when I'm surfing. Like I miss a wave and I just get like in this bad loop and I just struggle with that. And I feel like if you struggle with that, then this podcast is definitely going to be one to listen to because we're going to get into a ton of stuff, how to calm your mind to enhance your performance, preparing for heavy waves, how to deal with heavy breath holds, just getting a general surf tips and training as well. But I'm very excited and honored to have you guys. So thank you for joining.
Pleasure, Van.
Yeah, thanks, Van. Honored to be on it.
All right. First of all, Tom, I had a question for you. I saw that you took a board to the head and you had some stitches. How's your head doing?
The head's okay. It's taken a few boards over time. I'll tell you. And a bit of reef, fins, parts of surfboards and other people's surfboards, my surfboards, and various reefs around the world, and sandbars, those really flat, hard sandbars, just grazing head. But just recently, I had a very strange, kind of very unusual accident where I slipped off the rail because I had sunscreen on my hands. Yeah, wipe your hands of sunscreen before surfing properly. This one I slipped and somehow ended up head first as the wave dropped out from underneath me. Very inconsequential little 3-foot wave at North Narrabeen, one of our local breaks here. And I was just trying to take this little semi-late drop, but nothing out of the ordinary. Like I had, 57 years of surfing, right? So I'm taking off, but it was on a 5-1, little flat deck, little Feb fish, one of the South Feb fishes. And I was really keen to figure this board out because I hadn't properly really got my feet into it. And I just want to get there. And this was a really nice little wave and I went up, big surprise. It's like spear tackle. You've seen football when people grab people up with the legs and they'd spear them into the ground. Basically, I got spear tackled into my board. And I ended up splitting my head open here against the board. And the board didn't give. It just had a really solid glass job. And I ended up doing giving what they called, this is what the doctor called a zinger, where your cervical spine gets squashed and it sends a whole bunch of nerve kind of trauma through the arms. And I had this full electric shock through my arms. And it was a real shock to me. It was really shocking, to be honest. I was like, whoa. And then I couldn't turn my neck left or right. And I was just going, oh, my God. And I tried to ride a wave in because I couldn't even catch it properly. I had to wait for the white water. And I got in. The lifeguard he looked at me and said, Tom, what just happened? He goes, he's a good friend. He really switched on lifeguard too. And he goes, look, we're going to treat this as a spinal. So we're going to put you down on the ground with a stretcher and
Oh no.
Full brace, the whole thing. Someone gets a photo of it, goes all the way around the media, like went nuts. And I'm in there getting stitched up. We're not in the ambulance, full ambulance ride and everything. I'm like going, because I originally thought, I'd just got a bit of a cut. I knew that, a few stitches, and my neck will come good. That's how I'm thinking as I'm walking up the beach. But thankfully, he did the right thing, got me in the good zone, and actually calmed down. I was in quite a bit of shock. I didn't realize how much shock I was in. But that's our surfing for us. Like you just never know when it's going to happen. You never know.
Yeah, I always, yeah, it can be like this. It's always like the gnarly accidents often happen in like the most inconsequential like situations. That's how it's happened for me. And I think it's kind of ironic that like you were one of the guys that pioneered wearing helmets at Pipe, and you got injured on like a small wave on a chill day, just like I don't know, somehow ridiculous. But
The irony of life, huh? It's just crazy how it turns up, and you just never know. And it was definitely not a helmet wearing day. It's like couldn't be further from a helmet wearing day.
Oh man, that's so funny. Yeah, I was actually watching footage of you surfing Pipe back in the day, and you were like so gnarly. You were like wearing a helmet, and you're just like getting so slotted, going up to these massive sections and doing carves. I don't think anybody was doing it like that back then. You were like pushing limits. And I know that you made the finals of the Pipe Masters as a rookie as well. Like that must have been the most insane nerves. How did you calm your mind when you were in a heat? I mean, maybe back then you were just like riding this high, but like I'd be curious, like what were some strategies and tips that you use to calm your mind in your heats? And then Marcus, if you could chime in as well, like, maybe what are some of the tips you guys give to professional surfers, to your clients, to everyday surfers as well, and how to calm your mind?
Well, for me,
We'll start with you, Tom.
Yeah, from back in the day, I was like 18 years of age when I made the final at Pipe, and back then it was a 6-man heat, the final. So, and I had some of my heroes in the heat, like there was, Larry Bertelman, Dane Kealoha, who sandwiched me, just didn't want to let me get a wave. Larry Blair, who's just about to win his second Pipeline Masters. There was Sean Thompson. It was a loaded heat, and you just paddle out there as a kid. I just knew that I was, going to get what I deserved, like from these guys. They were just going to not let me get a wave because I was a bit of a threat because I could actually surf Pipe, and I was feeling it, and I had a lot of drive to surf Pipe. But for me, the best way to kind of start shaking off nerves is actually catch a wave and kind of quickly get a ride underneath the belt. That was my first strategy always. And but all the stuff that really, there was none of that in the system that we can use today that we already know. And Marcus can attest to this, the sort of practices that we're doing with Breathwork for surfers today and what's available for kids who are 18 years of age today to actually kind of set themselves up for a little bit more success on their first ride. Not only the first ride, but how they approach the whole lineup. If we come in really hot, a lot of, the nervous system's really like tight and it's just on survival mode. You kind of, the way you stand on your board, and if you're lucky, you get and stand up on the right spot on your board. So it's all, we want to be kind of free and relaxed as best as possible. But for me, back in the day, it was very raw. There were single fin days. We were kind of sliding out, then taking off from pipeline. There was no grip to the face, just the rail. It was, gosh knows, and always generally my first wave at Pipe was a smaller one on the inside because I just didn't want to go out there and get in amongst it with the other guys. So I sort of chip into a little one on the inside, start to relax myself just through riding waves. But now we can start working like we are now, Marcus. And how's the strategy for you, Marcus?
I mean, it's relevant to it's just as relevant to the average everyday surfer as it is to heat surfer, because it works the same way, right? Like if you look at the breath changes our physiological responses. So it's like you can literally turn fatigue into energy. You can turn stress and fear into a calm confidence through the breath. And so it depends. I mean, like if Tom and I were working with an athlete, you would assess where they're at before they paddle out, because some athletes actually operate best. If you say take a scale 0 to 10 and you ask an athlete, do you operate best when you're at 10, as in full ball, or 1? Every athlete's going to be different. Some are going to operate really well at 3 or 4, and some are going to operate well at 8. Now, if you're giving them calming meditative breath and they operate well at 8, then you're actually doing them a disservice. But the thing with breath work, you can put it into kind of, let's say 3 really loose categories. There's much more to it than this, but 3 really loose categories where you say there's breath to calm. So it's breath to bring the mind out of, anxiety, stress, overwhelm, or just being like overly active in the mind. Then there's breath to activate, do the opposite. So if someone says, I operate best at 8, but that morning they're feeling like they're at a 4, then you're going to give them breath work to really get energy going through the system so that they paddle out feeling energized, sharp, and ready to go. And, anything in between. And then there's other categories of breath, which we can talk about later, but say breath for altered states, breath to get into meditative states, breath for those types of experiences, which are obviously relevant for surfing as well. As you mentioned earlier with your with one of your podcast listeners that came up and said, how do you get out of the negative talk in the mind? Well, this is, it's all part of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I really like that approach where you're tailoring it to the individual, because you're so right. Like some people want to be amped up. Some people probably want to be more relaxed. And what I think is interesting as well is and maybe that's why it would be so valuable to work with a coach and see somebody, is I feel like there might be people where you think you're going to operate better at a certain level, but you would actually benefit operating at a different level. Like there might be people that, I always want to be at an 8, but then you watch how they behave in the water and you watch the way they perform, and you're actually like, oh, you know what? Maybe it might help you to dial it back down, or vice versa. And you wouldn't get that perspective unless you got some feedback, right?
Yeah, and I reckon that would be a really common thing for people that think they operate well at 8. Because not that many people do. It's like if you go, you're too energized, too amped, you're going to make bad decisions. And so if someone's naturally amped and naturally drawn to operate at that, it would mostly be good to bring them back just a little bit just before, just to get into the skyline. Right. And, if you look at it now, I mean, like just about every pro surfer is doing it, right? Like you look at Jack Robinson before he paddles out, he's got his particular breath routine. Mick Fanning was doing it back well before that. They're all, Griffin Colapinto's doing it. They're all doing it because, the ability to shut out all of the noise that's going on around them, and then all of the internal noise. And that's what we're doing with breath, right? We're learning how to come back to presence, to let go of the incessant thinking mind, which could be, fear-based, negative-based. And we're also learning to shut out external things and come back into the moment. So, all those guys are doing it just before they paddle out in heats.
Yeah. Well, when I'm reflecting on this, because, you ultimately, what would be the optimal state for most athletes to be in when they're performing would be, people talk about the flow state. And the flow state it's an interesting phenomenon, right? Because you're operating with a challenge that's the right level of difficulty, and you're probably coming at it with the right level of energy, right? So if it's too easy, you're not going to be able to access that flow state. So, Tom's surfing like a longboard wave and he's like, I'm bored, but if he's surfing, well, actually Tom probably doesn't get scared about anything. So maybe he's surfing Nazare or something and he's trying to paddle in at Nazare. I know you paddle it, you've surfed the eddy, so you're not scared of big waves, but like you're paddling at Nazare. Okay. And you're like, that's too much. Right. But like you enter the flow state where you're right in that zone where it's like just enough challenge, but not too much challenge. Right. And so I guess it's a similar thing when it comes to your energy level and you can use your breath to manipulate yourself to get into that optimal zone for your energy level and your breath. Is that kind of what you're saying there, Marcus, or Tom?
Yeah, and so exactly. And so if you look at flow state in those, what athletes call the zone, being in the zone is obviously a very heightened experience, and it usually can last for, around 20 to 30 minutes max. And then they come out of that. It's actually a kind of draining state in a way, but it's a perfect state for an athlete to be in. And you can't guarantee that state, but there are certain, as you just discussed, there are certain elements that can help to prime you for the possibility of shifting into that state. But when you talk about flow state with breath, it's actually a state you could be in at all times, which is essentially flow state is presence. That's what flow state is present. It's mindfulness, present moment, non-judgmental awareness, being with what comes up both internally, our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and externally, what we're facing in the outer environment. Being present to all of that is what mindfulness is, and that's a form of flow state. And I would suggest, meditation, as Tom would argue as well, and both of us have got a very consistent meditation practice, is like a foundation for that capacity. But the way to stay in that through the waking state is with the breath, because every time you come back to the breath gives you the chance to anchor back into the present. And the breath's a super interesting part of the nervous system in that it's the only part of the average human being. Certainly yogis and different people have mastered the ability to regulate other aspects, but it's the only part of the nervous system that exists in both the autonomic and somatic nervous system. In other words, it happens unconsciously, automatically, when we're not thinking about it, but we can take conscious control over it at any given moment. And that's pretty much the key to what we're talking about, because if you're going ahead and breathing unconsciously, then whatever emotional pattern and whatever thought pattern you're in will be supported by the breath. So an anxious mind and an anxious emotional body will create a breath pattern and that is telling the mind that we're in a state of anxiety, and it's actually feeding that fear back in, and it creates a loop, right? And then the ability to consciously steer our awareness to the breath, take control over it, and create and generate a pattern of breath that's conducive to bringing in a parasympathetic state and shifting out of sympathetic. We literally take control of our mind-body system in that moment. And you could even go as far as to say that the breath is quite literally the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious mind, because it's the one point in the human body where you can shift from unconscious to conscious immediately.
I love that.
Right.
So what are some concrete exercises that you like to give to your clients in terms of how to access that state, how to be present, and how to prepare? Let's say you want to get into that optimal, you're preparing for a heat or you're preparing for your daily surf, what would you recommend?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a number of warm-up exercises we do to get the breath moving deeper into the diaphragm. We've got the breath of fire, which we use 3 rounds of that. We do like a spinal breath, which is like a real arching. So we're really opening up using our arms and sort of pulling ourselves back down. So and numerous good solid breaths like that, right down, using every bit of breath we have right down into the belly. So both of those exercises, they start to kind of work the core of the body too. So we're working the core by squeezing the breath out with the belly button, and particularly in the breath of fire, where we're sort of doing 3 rounds of 30 with that, with a couple of an empty lung hold and in and a full lung hold. So we're actually in that, we're actually getting right down into the pelvis. So all that starts to warm ourselves up and get the capacity up, so that the system just starts to become more open as a result. And also, there's another practice called cosmic breath that's in our course that we have online, and that is a very powerful three stage set that kind of very much opens up everything to take it to the next level. within the actual program that Marcus developed, and we sort of started to practice and start to sort of design, sort of move towards to give the program that's available, is all about kind of restriction. Really, it's restricting and getting the and also pushing ourselves under stress and putting ourselves in a safe place on land, not in the water, but we're actually pushing ourselves to the point so we get to understand ourselves under that the CO2 tolerance levels, and how the body responds. As we were talking about this, that each person's individual, have an individual experience of their own physiology, and we're all a little bit different while we do it. But we've got like 9 exercises, but they're set down so they build pace and sort of build ourselves and our capacity up throughout that. That's a little bit of a nutshell. When we can, Marcus can take it to another level with that too. But there's just a really nice, short, sharp practice that we can do prior to any surf in a warm-up using the breath of fire, spinal breath. And
we could illustrate breath of fire for you for a second if you think it would be helpful for you and your listeners. Would you like us to just
sure? Yeah, let's get a little demo that way.
It's a really good practice to, as Tom said, to warm up the core, to flood the system with oxygen, and basically create a really strong connection between your diaphragm and your brain. Because one of the major issues people have with breathing is they don't breathe diaphragmatically. Well, there's a couple of major issues. Like before we jump into it, a lot of people breathe through their mouth, and mouth breathing is hugely problematic. It's an epidemic, and it's hugely problematic. And the problem with mouth breathing, for one, let's talk about what the nose does. The nose obviously humidifies and it creates a filter for like dust, pollens, and potential infectious things that come into our breath. It humidifies the air, so it takes, like, particularly in a climate you're in at the moment where the air is really cold, it's very brutal to breathe into your mouth. It's almost like your lungs are on the exterior of your body. They're very exposed. When it comes through the nose and all those turbines in the sinus system, it actually humidifies, warms up, and it comes into your lungs in a way that's received much more gently. Of course, when you breathe through your nose, you'll notice it's more restrictive for everyone. But some people, if they mouth breathe, it can feel really hard, right? That tension that's created in breathing through your nose compared to your mouth allows the diaphragm to activate. If you breathe in through your mouth, there's no kind of restriction or tension, and the diaphragm doesn't get used. Then we end up breathing up into our upper chest when our lungs are actually shaped in the opposite direction, where all of the alveoli that distribute the oxygen into the system, the larger portion of them are in the lower part of the lung. So when we breathe into the diaphragm, it allows that oxygen to be drawn deep into the lungs and then distributed through the body. So, firstly, nasal breathing, and activating that diaphragm. So breath of fire really helps with that. And it's quite a simple practice. We can do it together. So basically, if you put your hand on your diaphragm, which is, on just above your belly, below your ribs, and what we do is we'll take a deep inhale through the nose, and then we'll exhale through the nose. And then we'll take a half inhale through the nose, and we're going to exhale in short, sharp bursts, almost like you're blowing into a tissue, and the diaphragm snaps back towards the spine. Go slowly at first. So it's an explosive out breath. Continue on. Diaphragm snapping back towards the spine, almost like you're blowing your nose into a tissue. And the inhale is passive. It happens almost on its own. It's like a vacuum forms when the stomach comes back out. Just do like 10 more rounds. Inhale. Exhale and breathe. So a practice like that, that's an activating breath practice. So when we were talking earlier, if you're wanting to activate the system, so you wake up, you feel lethargic, or you're about to paddle out and you feel like you need to get some energy moving, but it simultaneously calms you. So it's not active like drinking a coffee and getting all razzed up like that. It's a calming, grounding, but activating one. Get a lot of blood going through the system, a lot of oxygen going through the system. And as Tom was saying, we might do like 30 of those. And after the 30th one, exhale and then hold the breath until the carbon dioxide really builds up and that strong urge to breathe comes on. Then inhale, hold the breath, do the same thing, and then repeat that process 2 more times. And what's happened, I often do that just literally walking down the beach. Like the surf's been kind of pumping the last 3 days here in Sydney, and we're surfing a spot where you have to walk down for about 5 minutes. And I'll do that practice because the surf's pumping too much for me to want to sit and do a breath set. I want to get out there. I'll do that while I'm walking. So I'm just like walking along the beach, 30 up, 30 breath of fires, breath hold, empty lung breath hold, full lung breath hold, 30 breath of fires. Do that 3 times. What's happened is we've activated the system, and we've also got the body used to that feeling of high CO2 and low oxygen, which is interestingly, your first breath hold in the day will be by far your worst. It'll be around about like 50% of your capacity if you haven't done any warming up. But then once you warm up like that, it's like, anything when you warm up for exercise, you get your breath. But if you don't, you can feel really out of breath for that first 5 minutes. So that importance of doing a warm up set before you paddle out.
I like that. And I think what makes this approach to meditation pretty cool is that it feels like very active, and that I think makes it more accessible. I used to be a pretty hardcore meditator. I would meditate an hour or 2 a day for 7 years or so, and did 10-day meditation retreats. But it was all anapana and vipassana. So it's just literally focusing on my breath, like the sensation in my nostrils for like 2 hours straight. It was incredible. I had incredible experiences doing it, but like I think that is not an easy thing to do, right? It's really hard to train your mind to do that. But this is something that even someone that struggles with meditation can, I think, easily dip their toe into because it's so active. And I feel like because it's this intense breathwork approach, it feels like that, you mentioned how it's like this activating, it has this activating effect. And that actually seems like more kind of the right thing to be doing before you go for a surf, as opposed to, well, I do believe that the meditation I used to do would be helpful, but it's a very different type of work. And I could see it kind of being more for priming yourself for a session in a lot of ways. And I like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, surfing demands attention, so the meditation is really good for kind of fine tuning your attention ability to attend to the moment. But, that really finally tunes it. But man, we're going to get. The last few days, actually, we had a build up of absolutely no waves over Christmas almost and New Year, and all of a sudden we got this swell, and I'm like paddling out in 4-foot surf, going, "Oh my god, I'm supposed to be going to Hawaii at the end of January." I'm like freaking out. I'm with these kids that I coach, and it's like I get drilled on the sandbar, going, "Oh my god!" We did some breath stuff, but I really needed that. I really needed that warm-up because I hadn't done it for a while. Even though I've done a bunch of other exercise and I do a bunch of other things, I'm quite active. But just that feeling of getting caught inside for a solid set was like, we've got to be on. The body's got to be on. Yeah. The mind has to have that experience of knowing itself in the pounding.
Totally. Because
and that's where this stuff where we're doing is kind of giving the people that we've given the course to and actually trained a few people in it already, that they're actually sort of getting a sense of themselves in situations that they never would have had that sense for. And once we get to that somewhat familiarity, like having that sort of I'm caught, I'm pinned on the sandbar, I know that I've got to stay with it. And that sense of that knowing kind of really helps us. And that's surfing, isn't it? Like really?
Well, it's kind of everything.
Getting caught inside.
It's kind of everything. And it doesn't need to be just big wave surfing. I mean, we've been surfing, 5-foot surf or whatever, but it's still powerful. And there's still, when you're paddling around a lot, you'll know from your own experience, Van, like if you get caught inside and you've been sprinting to get out and you've just caught a wave and then you caught 5 waves on the head, you could have a 3 or 4 minute static breath hold. If you've done free diving training, you might be even more. But in that moment, your breath hold could be 10 seconds max.
Yeah.
If your heart's really pounding and you're really out of breath and the CO2's really up, and it can happen really quickly. And so, it's not the only part of our training. We train every aspect of breath, from the foundations of correct breathing right through. But I think for any surfer, and actually for any athlete, it's not just surfing, any athlete learning high intensity breath apnea is unbelievable. And the research that's coming through on that now, they've been doing research with like rugby teams and different things. It actually increases your VO2 max. What's going on at that training when you're learning, because it's not the fun. I would have to admit, it's not the funnest thing to do. It gets better, but in the beginning, you literally feel like you're drowning. I mean, we're doing sets, like some of the sets, for an example, one of the hardest sets we do, and it comes at the end of, a really quite intense session. We do a set where we do an empty lung hold, drop to the ground, do 10 push-ups, stand back up, continue holding the breath for 10 seconds, then run 25 meters. And then you start breathing for the 25 meters back, and then you go straight into it and do it again. And this build up, the carbon dioxide build up is intense. And the carbon dioxide has such a strong trigger for the urge to breathe. But it's an interesting thing, because when you have that feeling, and this is what we're training, it's not actually low oxygen, it's high carbon dioxide, so you don't need to breathe. The body's screaming at you and telling you you're going to die, but actually your oxygen levels will be still really quite high for quite a period. And so learning these little cues, I mean, one of the simple ones that any of your listeners can do is, if you do a breath hold at a certain point, if you hold on for long enough, your diaphragm will start contracting. And by the time, a lot of people, if they've got no training, they'll actually they'll breathe before that even happens. At that point, you're really being told, I desperately need to breathe. You're around about 50% to 2/3 of the way through your oxygen at that point. You've got a long time. So if you're in a 10-second hold down and after like intense activity and that starts happening, you've got at least another 10 seconds. And for the average surfer, that's, you're not getting double wave hold down. So you're going to be up well before then. But to Tom's point, if you're not used to that and you haven't played with that kind of area of pushing your edges and knowing what that feels like, how can you relax? If you say to someone like, panic is your worst enemy, if you panic, you'll use all of your oxygen and you quite possibly could drown in a dangerous situation if you panic. That's the truth of it. But the body will go into panic straight away if you're not trained. And so learning in a safe environment, and we've designed it on the land primarily because if you do it in the water, you've got to have someone watching you the whole time, because you can have shallow water blackouts and things. So Tom and I train together on the land all the time. And then we take it into the water occasionally, but just to make it accessible, it's something you can do in your lounge room or at the beach. It's really easy in that sense.
I think that's such an important thing for people to know, that what you just mentioned there, because most people think when your body starts convulsing, like, I'm going to die, but it actually means you have more time.
Yeah.
And I think most people, and that can freak people out, but like, I feel like it's also super reassuring to know, okay, next time you have a really bad wipeout and your body starts convulsing, you got a lot more time. So
and we do a lot of that. We practice a lot of that. So that breath that Tom said, the cosmic breath, that's kind of like, it's cyclic hyperventilation, similar to like Wim Hof practices or Tumo, and there's many other modalities and different names for these things. But, what you're doing in that, you're doing a lot of, kind of mild hyperventilating, not extreme, but probably less extreme than Wim Hof does. Mild hyperventilating followed by breath holds. But what happens, because you can stay in those breath holds for so much longer, because when you're hyperventilating, essentially you get you're throwing off so much CO2, your body's full of oxygen, but the hemoglobins that carry the oxygen around, they need carbon dioxide in order to release the oxygen at a cellular level. And there's not enough carbon dioxide in the beginning because of the overbreathing. So you basically got all this oxygen that's not being used. And then eventually, as you hold your breath, all the CO2 rises back up, the oxygen starts being released, and then you're sitting in these breath holds for extended periods of time, right? The beauty of sitting in for those extended periods of time is you can sort of, it's almost like a slow-mo version of what would happen in the surf. So you start to become familiar with the sensations in your body, at a pace that you're able to register more clearly, if that makes sense. So you can feel the build-up of desperation even before the diaphragmatic contractions, but you're like, it's okay, I haven't even contracted. And then you have diaphragmatic contractions, then over time you learn to sit with like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Then you might sit with 10 or 20 of those contractions before you breathe. So you start becoming really familiar in a safe kind of seated environment, and then you take it into the high intensity training, and obviously everything amps up. It's kind of like what we talk about with meditation, right? You practice the meditation so in order to do it in life. And so we practice in this seated way, that in order that when we get in the heat of the moment, we're familiar. And then, of course, we also train in that heat of the moment sort of way so that we're familiar in a safe environment to then take it into the ocean.
Yeah. I feel like doing that kind of training must be so useful for people that are scared of hold downs, right? Because you become aware, you develop this confidence. Oh, I know that I can hold my breath on seated, and I know I can hold my breath even in these more intense situations where I'm, doing these exercises that you mentioned. And then when you go in the water, you're just going to feel so much more confident because you've trained it. And so if it happens, and what happens in the water when you do a hold down in the water is usually nowhere near as long as what happens on land, right? Even though I guess your heart's going to be beating a lot quicker, so you're going to be burning through that oxygen a lot more quickly as well. But still, it must give you a ton of confidence. I mean, Tom, I saw that video of you running around, like doing the breath holds and running around the beach. Like, how intense did that feel? Does it come close to wiping out in the eddy or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when we're training on the beach, we actually really take it to the tipping point. So, and it's quite surprising. Sometimes it comes a lot earlier than what you think, and I can really sense it on the beach. To be honest, in the big waves, under a lot of heavy water, the body gets thrown around. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of tearing at the body. And also the great thing about doing the training is empty lung holds, because falling down the face of a 20-foot wave or bigger, or when you hit the water hard, you always exhale. And then you grip the water and you don't have any chance to get a breath, and then you may go over. So that's a good chance of that. So you go back down, and then you're getting thrown around so violently that it doesn't make sense. The violence is intense. So I take it for granted a bit. If I'm going to go on a big surf, like I said, I'm just about to go to Hawaii again for, gosh, I don't know how many trips I've been there for since I was 16, but I'm really looking forward to it. But I've got to develop a relationship with it again. It's a new time. Every time I go to the North Shore, every time a new big swell comes, it's like there's a new relationship with it. This is a new time. I'm going back out. I do have a lot of base experience. My experience really counts. I know that I can generally get through it all, but I'll take some precautions. Like if it's a really big out of reef day, I'll definitely use flotation and maybe some high impact. But I like just the flotation myself, and I'll take those precautions, and I'll be with friends that I'm going to be able to back, and they're going to back me. And I think all those sort of taking those necessary precautions, but really I'm on my own. I've got to really be able to look after myself when I'm down there getting pounded. I think and that's that coming through experience. So it's easy for me to sit back and go, just hold your breath and take it. But all our different levels, I'm not fearless. I have fear. Fear is a natural response, particularly if I'm not used to having that volume of water coming at me for the last 12 months, 24 months. I'm definitely going to be, taking precautions on myself and watching how I respond. I think that's the big thing too, getting in touch with how I'm responding to it prior to going out. That's the big one, because if we're not in touch with ourselves, if we're just caught in the inertia of the froth, how many times I've just drawn myself into a surf because I was so frothy, about being out there, and all of a sudden, oh God, I'm actually feel like I've got to go and change my equipment. I've got to go in, get a bigger board. I got to, kind of overcook myself and think I could ride this little board, but no, I've got to go and get it.
I thought you were going to say you had to go and change your board shorts.
I've done that. I've done my first surf in Hawaii. One of my first surfs at Sunset Beach. I just shit myself on a wipeout, literally. So, and it was messy, and so I've had that defecation getting spun over the falls at inside Sunset at 16. Involuntary.
I wasn't expecting that.
Involuntary defecation, but the evacuation of the bowel. It happens, right? And it might happen for you. I don't know, but that's happened. I've experienced it. Thankfully, it's been. Well, I don't know.
That might be an advanced module.
How not to shit your pants.
Take yourself to the next level and to shit yourself properly. But it's like, but that's happened, and it happens to us, and it's a natural response to the body. But we try to avoid that. But it happens, and I don't know. It might happen to me on this coming trip. I don't know. Whatever's coming up. But I certainly do feel that getting a gauge of how you are before going in the water. We don't have to wait till we're in the water before we kind of really shitting ourselves. We just take a step back, really evaluate yourself and how you're feeling. You don't have to go out. Like, it's not absolutely imperative just because there's a whole bunch of crew going, come on, I've noticed that over the years that I've been able to start to sort of pull back in certain situations, or know when I'm just so ready to go. And I've got the right piece of equipment. I feel really good within myself. I can go and take a risk.
It's like a maturity that comes, right? I remember reading about both Greg Long and Dorian saying that on different days where, Dorian just looking at Jaws one day and just saying, I'm not feeling it. And he didn't paddle out. And it's a big moment, right? In a big wave surfer's journey, to be okay with that, to be okay with the ego side of that and know. But I think it's so important. And I think it's super interesting listening to Tom say that he has fear, right? Because I think we, like the average surfer, just looks at people like Tom and all these other helmmen and just thinks, they're fearless, but it's not. It's all relative. It's like, and that's why I think this sort of training is so important, because, your fear could come in at, double overhead. Whereas for Tom, that might be playful. But that fear is the same fear. It's the same experience, the same physiological experience. It's the same emotional experience, the same mental experience. What if we could train ourselves so that where we meet our fear becomes fun, and then we can extend into something else? And I think that's what's really cool. It doesn't need to be 25 foot. But what if you're going on a boat trip to Indonesia and your mates like to surf when it's 6 foot, but you're petrified, but you train and you go, now I'm actually comfortable, and I'm having, not only that, but I'm having fun. Because really, like, for most of us, that's all it's about, right? Most of us aren't making careers out of surfing, and we're not like chasing big waves for edits and things. We're just interested in pushing ourselves and having fun. Those two elements is where it's at for most people.
And I think the key here is too, like your listener who gave that remark, we don't want to wait until we're in the water, until we kind of working on this stuff, because it's too late. You're in nature's, like playground. She's doing all the talking when we're out there, and we're responding to each lump in the ocean, making a decision on which one to ride or where to paddle out. And we are literally trying to work our way through our intellect the whole time in the ocean. And if we're so bound up to it, and it's just too late, we need to work. It's best to work on land and then take it into the water.
100%.
Get the experience with yourself. Let the surf sort of draw you closer to yourself, and then go back out and do it again. Put yourself back in it. It's just one of the most remarkable kind of activities or lifestyles we have that actually puts us in full engagement with Mother Nature, and she's doing all the talking. and like all the talking. So, and once we kind of, engage ourselves and get to know ourselves better through her, we get to actually sort of play. And that's, I think, with this stuff, placing it on the land, getting close to ourselves on the land, then get it, and then bring that into the ocean and allow her to kind of draw ourselves closer to ourselves again. So, yeah, and I think that's been my experience, and she's continually doing it. She's, just like we were surfing together, Marcus and I, yesterday morning, in a really fun, like, I don't know, maybe a couple of 6 foot waves coming through. And we were so lucky we got this spot which not many crews surf, and there's only 3 of us out, and we're, it was just, she was, doing a thing, 2 different swells, had a nice sandbar that we could get caught in, and one of our mates, who's he's about the same age as me, is he? Was his name, and he's a bit slower.
Coming off an injury, off a long-term injury. So he's like, yeah.
And we just watched it. I said, "Send it, mate," because he's just paddling. He was in the spot, and I felt really, oh God, send it. And he just went for it. It was a bit late.
That's right. He came to our Breathwork for Surfers class last Thursday.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, as Tom, I mean, that's so cool what you're saying. That it's like, it's such a place to test yourself, right? It's in amongst the fun. But, like in relation to what your listeners said, like, how do you get out of your mind? Because I was talking about this with Tom yesterday. I think a common experience for people, you'd say, I surf this little reef break locally a lot as well. So it's quite a tight little pack. And so you're kind of really on display, and if it's, when it's your turn, it's your turn. But if you wipe out, you feel like you blew someone else's wave. It's got that sort of feeling. It's very easy. I find, when I'm surfing out there, if one wave goes well, the next one goes well, before you know it, you're in flow state, and it's that state we were talking about earlier. You're not thinking, you're just doing and being present. And it's like, such an effortless surf. But occasionally, for whatever reason, you fall once and it's like, oh, and then you fall again. And then the mind comes in, right? And this is the question, because I always think about it like this, right? The way people start operating in their mindset then is they start saying to themselves, don't blow it. Like, you're paddling into a wave and you're saying, don't fall. But if you take golf as an example, the difference between a professional golfer and a punter, they come to a water hole and the punter looks across the water hole and says, don't hit it in the water. The professional golfer says, land at 3 foot from the pin. The water's not even there. And so if you think about that in terms of what your language does for a visualization in your mind, landing at 3 foot from the pin, when I say don't fall, what do I visualize? I visualize falling. Or you say don't hit it in the water, but even though you're saying it in the negative, the visualization is hitting it in the water. And so then you wonder why you keep repeating the same thing, right? And so that's where the breath becomes so important, is how to, in that moment, it may not be being able to turn the mind into a positive, but even being able to get out of the loop of that thought and bring the mind back into presence, and the feeling of the water around you, the feeling of the breath coming through the nostrils, coming into the body, the feeling of the body, maybe even noticing the tension in the body, breathing, letting that go. And then as you paddle into the next wave, you've got the potential to reframe it and visualize what you were doing normally, which is like, knifing it and pulling in rather than don't fall.
It's so true. I forget the exact study, but there was a study they did, a psychological study, where it was just telling people to identify opportunities or threats. And that totally I forget. I really should have looked that up, because I was thinking about it in the context of this, doing this interview here. But they literally found that the people that were going through this test, if they were told to look for bad things, they found way more bad things. And if you were told to look for good things, you found all the good things. And it's kind of like, but there's literally a psychological basis for the way our brains work, where if you look for the good, you'll find good. And if you look for the bad, you'll find the bad. So
and to add on top of that, there's a psychological basis where we have a huge bias towards negativity. They say around about 85% bias. So if you're not comes back to what we're talking about, right? Using the breath for conscious awareness, because if you are mindful and present and conscious, you can actively choose to look for the good things. But if you're unconscious, you're actually going to just by pure, it's actually an evolutionary thing, right? It was designed to keep the species alive, like looking for threats. So when we go unconscious and we're not actively aware of our thoughts, what's coming up is negative thoughts 85% of the time. So that ability to come back into presence and to dictate, like Tom said earlier, dictate where you steer your awareness becomes so important. And you can't do that. So you can't create change from the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind just keeps repeating the same behavior. So it's literally like what Bruce Lipton calls the faulty software running the computer. It's literally a program that keeps creating the same reality. And so the breath and meditation becomes a kind of ability to drop into the present and choose a new reality, the way you're talking about, through steering your awareness to positive things rather than negative things.
Oh, totally. I mean, surfing is 99% mental, right? There's this huge mental aspect to it, where if you're in the zone, you're in a good mood, and you're in that zone and you're in that flow state, you can surf incredibly. And you can take that same person, put them in a bad state, and they're just going to surf like complete crap. I mean, we see it with the pros all the time in events. You'll see surfers, they all have the talent. It's just a matter of, are they in that zone? Are they able to access that state on that day? And so it's so cool that by using breath work and using meditation and all these things that you're teaching, you can train that on land, so that when you get out into the ocean, you're going to be that much more likely to be able to tap into that flow state that you're shooting for. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So I guess we got to start getting a little bit closer to wrapping up. So obviously training your mind is going to be really important. I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of how important it is to train your paddling. Let's say, how important of a component is paddle training to be paddle fit as a surfer?
So it sounds amazing when I coach someone who's a really good athlete in another sport, a high achieving, high end athlete who's at the top of their game. And you take them surfing, and it's quite surprising as to the actual relentless nature of the ocean. And no matter where we go, it might be like 2 foot, 3 foot, and they're using a softboard or something, or they're trying to figure it out. They might even have a board of their own, and they've got high hopes of getting out the back, right? And and I go, okay, you want to give it a go? All right, this is, you can paddle, all right, but and yeah, I can do it, yeah. So often you just see them completely toasted after a few waves have hit them. So there is certain, feeling the psychological effect of feeling like you're not getting anywhere is brutal. And so the ocean, she can constantly do that to us. But if we, the paddle fitness that I take for granted, and, it's not to its peak at the moment. I know what it's like to be at the peak. And some of the training that I've done to enhance it, such as, interval training in a pool, sprint training, also long course swimming, been excellent. Paddling open ocean paddle boards, I've gotten great results from that. Just doing downwinds, which is a whole lot of fun. And also sprint training on a board in flat water, which has been really good. Just on a nice paddle board does make it nice, but you can get on your own board and do that. It's very restrictive, but I've found that all of those styles of training, but particularly any kind of training where you're doing it with someone, with a couple of people, where you're testing each other on a sprint basis, where you're actually building up our ability to get out the back and actually recover really quickly. So you're ready for the next wave. So recovery time just shrinks, and you kind of, I'm back out the back. I'm ready for another one. And then I'm back out the back. There's another, the surf's getting better, and I want to stay out here. And so all of a sudden, that recovery time becomes more and more valuable, particularly if you're getting a couple of poundings, you're getting caught inside, and then you've got to sprint back outside beyond the break. because there's a set coming and you want to get outside over a set, all that sort of stuff. If we can recover quickly, reduce that recovery time so we're ready for the next wave to, make the most of it in a relaxed and sort of, like calm effort, and able to sort of engage every element of our technique and the board with that sort of, you're talking about the flow state, make ourselves, the best possible scenario for us to be available for that to drop in. Definitely through good, solid sprint training or any sort of interval training where we're kind of really pushing the body. They call it Tabata training, which is another way of doing it, which is very, very simple. You can do it on a bike, you can do it on a paddle, or I use a ski erg and things like that, where we just do good blasts for, 10 seconds, 20 seconds off, 10 seconds hard, 20 seconds off. You do that for 5 minutes and you do it full effort. I mean, it's just 5 minutes. You really sort of open up everything.
What's the nature of surfing, right? Like it's on and off. You're not paddling the whole time, and actually you paddle at really different paces. Like you can paddle really steadily on the way out, and then there can be like, oh my god, there's a set coming, you're sprinting. But also to get into a wave, you're often sprinting as well. So having those different gears, I really like. I saw that you've released releasing the paddle trainer. I think it's similar to what we're doing, that creating the ability to replicate that training, because it's easy for Tom and I. We're like a minute from the beach, but a lot of people are not.
Yeah.
And so how do you to stay fit? But that's what ruins most people's surf trips, right? Like a lot of, and it's not even just being close to the beach. I mean, a lot of my friends are close to the beach, but they might work in the city, and they leave in the dark, come home in the dark, surf on the weekends, and then your weekends you're not fit, and so it's not a great surf. Then you go away on your surf trip, and it's like, it's you need to be fit. And so I guess like similar to what we've done, it seems like a really cool idea to be able to do that in your lounge room. If you're doing something like Tom's saying for 5 or 10 minutes, so cool.
Yeah, that was exactly the intention. And we've been talking a lot about how to access that flow state, and I feel like so much of that flow state comes from being present, using the techniques you're talking about, and then also just being prepared. Like when you go and surf those big swells, you're probably like double checking your leash. You're like, is my equipment right? Are my fins right? And you're doing all the work, and you've been surfing your whole life, so you probably don't need to train in terms of some things. But for the everyday surfer who doesn't get to surf as much, like getting into paddle shape before you head out, that's just like one check off the box. You're like, all right, I got that. So when you're paddling for that wave, there's no question of like, am I going to have the juice to get into this wave, or am I going to tire out? You're just like, okay, I got this, I got the endurance. And so get in. So that was definitely the intention, to allow people to prepare on dry land, just like your breath work and your meditation allow you to train your mind on dry land. So you're going to perform in the water. Well, cool. I got a few final finishing questions for you guys. First question is, what is your intention when you stand up on a wave and you're about to surf it?
Have fun. It's like, go for the joy. It's like, I'm looking for the best scenario on the wave, and just to sort of play, and I think that's been that from the get-go, and there's been all these different versions of it, but it's still the same thing for me.
All right, Marcus, what's your?
I think kind of the same thing. I wouldn't say I have an intention with any wave. My intention in the whole experience of surfing would be to be in flow. And so I guess like that would extend into the waves. That's how I'd like to think about surfing, to be in flow with the wave, rather than, I never think of surfing as like bashing the wave or fighting the wave. I just like the idea of being in sync, in flow.
I love it. If you were going to surf the same wave for the rest of your life, what wave would you surf? And if it's a secret spot, you don't have to name it, but.
Wow, that's a big one.
Can we control the crowds?
Yes. Okay. You can control the crowd. No crowds. That's the wave.
I'll take D-Land.
Oh, it's really up the top of my list too. Wow. So hard. Like, I'm such a particular person now all of a sudden. There's a wave up in the Mentawai called Telescopes. It's the left, and I think that, because of its variety, in the whole wave. But G-Land's got all these different waves in the one wave. So, God, man, I'm tossing it
Maybe you
up.
take telescopes, I'll have G-Land, and we can do trips to each other's.
Okay, light each other up, and down. Yeah.
Nice. That sounds great. Okay, and then if you were on a deserted island and you had telescopes and G-Land right in front, what board would you bring?
The one board.
Yep, one board. That's all you get.
Mm.
But it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
I'm taking a 6.6 Christensen Nautilus.
Nice.
Quad fin setup.
Right. Wow.
You're talking to a man who has like 700 boards.
no. He gets a new board every week, and he's like,
I'm going to leave here for a plane in like 3 minutes. But it's going to take him an hour.
I tell you, wow. You know what? Just recently, I've been writing the quad setup as well, and it's just at the top of the list right now. It's an album Bomgia, which is only 5.9. So, but I could probably run something a little bit longer than that just to sort of cover a few bases, and so I could write it in something a bit more solid because I'm expecting G-Land or telescopes to be at least double overhead.
Yeah. Oh man, that sounds very, very dreamy right now. Nice. Well, everybody definitely check them out. Breathwork for Surfers is your Instagram, right? And you guys got a course as well. If I take that course, can you guarantee I won't shit myself?
We guarantee you won't until you do that module. That's the module we're adding to the course. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So if you're trying to avoid shitting yourself, then definitely check them out.
Yeah.
Just wear the right boardies so you get good ventilation.
Yeah. And we'll send you that course, man, and we'd like to offer your listeners a discount code to it as well. So we'll send that to you, and you can put it out.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, man.
Thank you very much for having us and the listeners.